So with that, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and I have a presentation I'd like to share. You've seen this presentation actually back in July, but I thought it would be helpful. Can you see my screen now? Is that up there?
Yes.
Yeah. So what I thought I'd do is I go back through that presentation and kind of give you an update on where we are with some of the items that we discussed just a little over 2 months ago. So this may look familiar to you, but we've divided the project into 2 phases. The first one being building the team, doing some site work, selling Old City Hall, starting the design process, and developing an overall financial strategy. The intent of doing that in phases is that we get to a certain point, we figure out how and how much, and then we move into the more detailed design and construction documentation phase. So what have we done? Last time I met with you, I was talking to you about building the team when I discussed this in detail. So hiring an owner's representative. So we're in process. Interviews are tomorrow and Friday, and I'm hoping we'll have a contract to present to the council for approval in October. And just as a process note for folks, we will likely issue a notice of intent after we make a determination. And then we negotiate a contract, and then that contract is what City Council approves. So we're hopeful we'll get through the contract negotiations in time for next month's council meeting. The next step will be hiring the project architect. And I just wanted to highlight that we haven't even done this. We're drafting our request for proposals right now so that we can hit the ground running once the OR is on board. But that we won't release that until the OR is hired. And then finally, the hiring of a construction manager, general contractor. This won't happen again until the OR is on board and possibly the architect. And so I'll keep you all posted on that, but that's sort of where we're at in terms of developing the team. And just so folks know why things move so slow, like molasses in government, is the way that we have to do contracting. The appropriate way to do these types of projects that are this big is it requires a request for proposals. Those typically take a few weeks to develop. They go through a very rigorous legal process. Then they're posted for a number of weeks. In this case, it was 3 weeks. Then it takes time for the committee to review. Then we have interviews and so forth. So I just want folks to know I've actually been working on this nonstop since we met in July, but it takes about 2 months, 3, to get through a full RFP process. Work. So we're also continuing to do the remediation work. So we're scheduling that for mid-October, but it may happen sooner. We walked the site with Cliff from the Manzanita market. We don't expect it to start before the last market next week, but we may be able to get in there sooner. So if you start to see fencing going up around the area, that's because we're just getting prepared to close off the site so that we can get that work done. Once that is finished, then the phase 1 environmental assessment will also be completed. And so we'll be sure to share that information once it comes through. The other part of this was selling of Old City Hall. So I've also been doing a little work on that. The appraisal, it's actually complete. I'm in the process of reviewing it, and I'll be presenting that to the City Council in October. The other thing that I'm working on as well is the State Historic Preservation Office. So we have to submit, because the building is more than 50 years old, we have to submit to SHPO a project determination. So that determines whether or not the project is a contributing historic structure. And if so, there's typically some form of mitigation, which can be in the form of anything from storytelling to a plaque. So we'll be going through that process. My intent is to get that submitted to SHPO hopefully next week. They have 30 days to provide a determination. So we'll be sharing that determination once we get it. And then once we get that SHPO determination, I'm anticipating, I usually don't put months in here, but I think it's important folks kind of have at least some sense of where we're headed. But the public hearing we'll be holding with council to discuss the surplusing of that property. I expect to happen sometime in November, possibly December. And then the disposition process would begin at that point. And so council will discuss whether to surplus the property, and then they will set a price. And we will be going forward with a sealed bid process. Basically, council sets a price, we accept sealed bids, and then we open those bids, and then we take the highest bid. So I'm working on getting a broker who will help assist us through the kind of title process on that. But those are the next steps on Old City Hall. So again, the outcomes, so the actions that we're taking, what the outcomes are. So the team is set. We're hoping that the OR and the architect are on board by the end of the year, if not sooner. Environmental remediation, as I said, we're expecting this work in the phase 1 ESA to be done by the end of the year at the latest. And then the property is sold and funds are set aside into the City Hall Fund. This is an important piece of information because this will feed into our discussions around financing. My hope is that we will have that property sold and closed. I think end of year is aspirational, but hopefully early next year. So that's kind of where that piece is at. And just to remind folks, we haven't even started really having public discussions around the financing strategy and schematic design. So we have no building, and we are working towards a strategy. And that overall financial strategy is really, I'm expecting we'll start to have our first discussions about this in November. I've been doing outreach to financial advisors as well that can provide some support through this process, and we'll be working with the council to develop a financial strategy and plan. So for those who are interested, I expect that we will be discussing City Hall at every council meeting for the foreseeable future. And then finally, just to kind of remind people, we have not started the design process. We haven't hired an architect. There are a lot of information that's already been completed will be included in terms of background information. But this architect is going to help us with developing a community engagement strategy and then developing this preliminary building concept. So the community will be engaged in the design process and then kind of throughout the hiring process, basically, because again, we'll be coming to council with those recommendations once we get there. I expect that there'll be options that we look at through the schematic design process, and then we will work together to select a preferred option that we will then advance into the design, development, and construction documentation phase of the project. So with that, I will stop sharing and I will hand it back to the mayor.
Okay, thank you for that update, and thank you, Linda, and thank you, Leila. And I think for that update on the City Hall, I think we'll move on to the next item on the Doors contract.